Welcome to OK Computer. I'm Dan Nathan, joined by Deirdre Bosa, host of CNBC's Tech Shack. Debo, welcome back.
Hello, how are you?
Good. We got a big show. You and I have a lot to talk about. We got to talk about your 49ers. We got to talk about the Temu Bowl. At least that's how it was known in my household. And we got to talk about Temu, which took, I think, the bowl by storm. But first things first, just a little housekeeping. Stick around for a conversation that I had. We are launching our Funders and Founders series brought to you by RBC Capital. And today we had Rick Heitzman, the co-founder and CEO of Firstmark Capital, VC firm here in New York. Many listeners and viewers of the pod know Rick pretty well. He's been coming on with us for years. And also Zach Rattano. Zach is the CEO and co-founder of Ro, the telehealth company that Rick led the Series A few years ago. These guys have been great friends. And really what we do is we talk about just kind of the life cycle of their relationship as Rick, as a board member, as an early investor, as an advisor. And we talk a bit about that relationship. We also obviously get into Ro's huge push into GLP-1s there. And so this is a really interesting conversation. I think those who are just interested in the space, interested in the relationships that VCs and founders have, and getting a sense for where we are in the private tech markets too. So stick around for that. But D, you and I, we got lots to talk about. There's stuff on the chatbots, on the Copilot, on all that sort of stuff. But let's talk about...
One week, lots of consumery stuff.
Lots of consumer stuff. Let's talk about, first things first, the Super Bowl here, because my 18-year-old daughter, I got a text at 6 p.m. on Sunday. She's in boarding school. She said, "What's the YouTube TV password?" She was watching the Super Bowl because she's like Taylor's #1 fan. She watched the whole bowl. I got a text after OT saying Taylor Swift. It was all caps in our family chat, all caps. Taylor won the MF Super Bowl. ... Okay, so you can.
So you're telling me your daughter watched 4 hours of football for 58 seconds of Taylor Swift.
Yes. How about that? Okay. So talk about like widening the tent or whatever you want to call it. I know there was a lot of haters out there. And listen, I am sorry for your Niners. Brock Purdy played an absolutely amazing game. So like shout out to the Niners. He's going to have a great long career.
You know, I will admit that I am not a San Francisco native. In fact, I'm not even American. I'm Canadian. So football to me is more of like a social event, but it certainly was here. And my whole street, I got to tell you, anytime anything happened, you would hear all the houses on the street like collectively gasp or collectively cheer. And in the end, it was one very large signal expression of outrage because it was so close. I mean, and not being a huge football fan, I was absolutely glued to the screen for overtime. I also didn't know how it worked, right? Because in hockey, it's like sudden death, first goal. And I remember, I was trying to figure out whether touchdown won it, whether they went on. But it was a very exciting game. I mean, yes, there was Taylor Swift, but the game itself was fantastic. And that's coming from a non-football fan.
Well, I'll tell you this, is Shanahan, the coach of the Niners, is getting some criticism because it sounds like they didn't exactly know how the new overtime rules worked either. All right. So while your Niners or your adopted Niners didn't win, it seems like the biggest winner of the Super Bowl was the Temu. And just here are some stats. And first things first, I also want to say is that I first heard about this company in your reporting. I think you were even doing it before they did the 2023 Super Bowl, which really kind of put it on a lot of U.S. consumers' radars. But here's a couple stats. This is from CNBC. We'll put this all in the show notes. The #1 most downloaded app in the U.S. in January. That was before this Super Bowl blitz. Okay, 51 million monthly active users, up 300% year over year. This from The Information. Goldman Sachs estimates that Teemu spent $1.2 billion on Meta advertising in 2023, and this is from CNBC. On the Apple App Store on Monday, the top 3 most downloaded free apps were Paramount Plus, Copilot, and Temu. So those were all big advertisers during the Super Bowl. Let's start with Temu because, again, they probably, had 3 ads? They probably spent over $25 million, but everybody's talking about it.
Temu is a phenomenon in almost every sense of the word. And if you want sort of background context analysis, make sure you check out our weekly that we did on Tech Check. That's from a year ago, and it's only increased in popularity. As you said, Dan Nathan, a lot of folks during the Super Bowl were like, what is this? Shop like a billionaire, but buy cheap crap online. But it's worked. I mean, they have been spending so much money, and it used to be thought that Chinese companies couldn't break into the US market. They would have a really hard time doing so, capturing the American consumer that is so lucrative, right? Like, sure, you've got a 300 million Chinese middle class that can spend money, but Americans are spending real money, like a lot of dollars. So if you crack the American consumer as a Chinese company, it's just such a lucrative thing, and you go beyond China. And even Alibaba didn't do that for so many years because it was thought to be so difficult. Temu has just swept the American landscape, consumer landscape. And part of it is those Super Bowl ads, but it's really cheap dollar store bargain basement stuff, right? Like, I think kids love it, right? Because you can buy so much with so little. And it raises questions about this business model, right? How is that sustainable? We've seen this before, and that you spend a lot of money to acquire these customers, but it's not very profitable. Well, you look at Temu's success in China, and it doesn't exist in China. It's called Pinduoduo, right? Or PDD Group is a public company. It trades, its ADRs trade here in the United States. It also trades in Hong Kong. Been incredibly successful and has basically proved out the model that you can go and lose a ton of money over time just to capture the consumer and then slowly raise prices. So that's probably the business model here. But while they're losing money now and they're spending billions of dollars in advertising and discounts, there is a path to profitability that it has sort of displayed in China. I don't know if it's going to work the same way here. That may be an open question, but it's just this phenomenon that has, a ton of American consumers now, most downloaded app.
And there's very little. So you mentioned PDD, Pinduoduo. I'm probably massacring the name there, but this is a company that is it is wildly profitable. They're expected to have $33 billion in last year's sales, going up to maybe $47 billion. I suspect the U.S. is a small part of that, right? As Temu ramps a little bit, do they break out any of the kind of international sort of sales? I'm assuming this is primarily China based, but the opportunity is obviously abroad.
Yeah, because there's just bigger baskets or bigger wallets in the US. It's also kind of like this Trojan horse, right? You put this against the geopolitical background of rising tensions and, US government wanting to ban the likes of TikTok. And actually, there was a movement to try to get Temu to not put those ads on during the Super Bowl, which didn't work. How many did they have? I think 5. I saw one in overtime as well. But obviously that didn't work. And the way that they advertise too is no nod to the fact that this is a Chinese company. So I don't know how profitable the US business is, probably not very profitable. But again, the Chinese business is more mature and has found that path to profitability.
And it's interesting. So you mentioned TikTok, and you mentioned for, over 5 years, there's been a push by, it's kind of bipartisan in a way to ban TikTok for a whole host of reasons, privacy, misinformation, we get it. And that's only going to probably get dialed up this year a little bit into the election. But when you think about what this could mean, right, these cheap direct-to-consumer Chinese imports for U.S. retailers like Target and Walmart and the like, right now, like assuming, like they're, a really low penetration in the U.S., it really isn't much of a threat right now. Target's a company expected to do over $100 billion in sales. Walmart, probably near $500 billion in sales. But if you just think about, from just defending a U.S. consumer standpoint from from cheap Chinese imports, it seems like this would be an easy one. And this also comes at a time where the Biden administration, or at least maybe his campaign, launched their very first TikTok. And they've, so it's just kind of weird, like some of the messaging that we're getting from the government, it doesn't seem particularly consistent.
Well, and that's the difficult part of this, right? Like the government wants less Chinese apps, less Chinese goods flooding our borders, but you can't deny that they've sort of captured something with a consumer. And it was so ironic to see Biden's, and cringy, I will say, to see Biden's first TikTok, but it's kind of like do as I say, not as I do, right? He needs to capture that younger demographic. And where are they? They're on TikTok, and they're also shopping on Temu and Shein, by the way. It's sort of what I call like the new guard of Chinese tech. Alibaba, Tencent, they were sort of the old guard, Baidu as well. And there's a new class of Chinese companies that aren't just big in China, but they're big here. And that is a key difference.
Yeah. Let's talk about another, this was a Super Bowl commercial, I think, that was talked about a lot, and that was Microsoft's Copilot commercial. And they're trying to kind of humanize AI and, just kind of tamp down some of the fears that maybe a lot of like the sort of public, 125 million people tuned in to watch the Super Bowl. And they're probably not tracking a whole heck of a lot of what's gone on with some of the biggest companies in at least the US, but obviously the world also, and the sort of investments that they're making in generative AI and the way that they're projecting these products and how they're going to help consumers or businesses and the like. And so this was a very humanizing sort of commercial. I think people kind of liked it, but it's kind of interesting. You and I are recording this on Tuesday afternoon, and there was an article in the Wall Street Journal. And listen, this was my experience too. It was basically saying that Microsoft's Copilot has been the hand of, beta testers for a while. And some of the reviews are coming in fairly lukewarm. And then for some of us, and you and I have talked about this on the pod over the last couple of months, like I'm generally pretty underwhelmed with ChatGPT. Obviously people have been underwhelmed with Bard and now Gemini. I like the perplexity, but here's the last point I'll just make is that if I don't use any Microsoft products, which I don't have Office, right? So Copilot is not going to be a thing for me, right? But I did just try Gemini Advanced from Google because I use Gmail, I use YouTube, I use a whole host of other, Alphabet products, and that might be the one that I go with. It might not be as good as ChatGPT. It might not have the integrations that, let's say, Copilot has because they've been testing this for a while, but consumers are likely to choose one, and consumers who don't use Microsoft products are likely to use something. Maybe it's Perplexity, the way that, and I used this example on a pod yesterday, in the late 90s, people were using the search engine, that came loaded up on the disk on the PC that they bought, right? But as soon as Google came around, it was lights out, right? And so Perplexity could have that ability to displace like some incumbents right now. And so, I just think it's like the jury's still out, despite the fact that Microsoft has gained $1 trillion in market cap over the excitement of Copilot and ChatGPT integration. And that's just happened over the last 4 months or so.
Thought it was interesting to have Copilot as kind of an enterprise product. I'm in the same boat as you. I don't have any sort of touch points with Microsoft. I do my docs on Google Docs through a browser. I work on a MacBook. And who is going to actually buy Copilot, right? Like who watching the Super Bowl? Maybe they were pitching it to business executives. Everyone was watching the Super Bowl. So maybe that incremental sale is worth it and someone's going to install it at their company. But the future of search is something that I have been spending a lot of time thinking about. And it's Google's to lose, right? As you say, we use all of these Google products. The distribution, the habit of Google search is so entrenched for most people. And you just made me think of the fact that Google didn't have a commercial in the Super Bowl. How easy would it have been to show them that there's a toggle button now in their Google app on your iPhone where you could turn on a free version of Gemini, their version of ChatGPT, yet they didn't do that. And it's really indicative of like this broader strategy, right? That has worked so far for Microsoft. It's seen as sort of the AI leader. It's not experimenting. It's actually trying to put these tools in your hands, even if they're not as impressive as or cracked up to be all that you heard they were. They're just pushing it. Google's still kind of moving slowly. It's not making these bold moves. I wondered when Gemini came out, if maybe we'd be Geminiing things instead of Googling things. But obviously Google's not prepared to make that switch and totally cannibalize one of the greatest businesses of all time, which is search ads. You brought up the name Perplexity, which is something I do use more and more these days. To bring it to the masses and to the mainstream in the Super Bowl, it seems like a missed opportunity. for Google.
No doubt. And again, they just kind of relaunched this thing, and the name is not something that's easy to turn into a verb, Gemini Advanced. But I will say this about Perplexity, and I think it was about a month ago, the company raised $74 million at a $520 million valuation. I'll just say this. I'll bet you this company is going to get bought probably by an Apple. It's probably a deal that Apple could get by regulators when you think about just how much Microsoft has invested in the space, how much Amazon and Alphabet have invested in the space. We know that, that Apple has hinted to something in the generative AI space, but this is probably a deal that could happen. And the founders of this company, the CEO at least, is ex-OpenAI. If you're thinking about this technology as something that we don't truly understand what it could mean and how impactful it would be, you don't want a couple companies just running away with it, right? You'd want a bunch of big platform companies competing. It'll be better for consumers. It'll be better for businesses. And it'll actually better for humanity, if you will. So that's something that I think is kind of an easy one to keep a close eye on. And then you and I had also talked about how Alphabet and Amazon have been going back and forth investing in Anthropic, which is also a bunch of ex-OpenAI folks. And so again, Alphabet will never be able to buy a company like that. And especially at the valuation that's trading at, I don't think any of them will want to, but Amazon is also likely to kind of make a deal in the generative AI space too. So that's something like, let's keep an eye on. Does that make sense to you?
It does. But one thing I would add is let's not forget about Meta and the open source model, right? We had an announcement from NVIDIA today, RTX, which is basically edge computing, having the capability of generative AI right on your computer. And it relies on open source models like Meta, like Mistral. And I don't know who wins this thing, right? It's Alphabet, Microsoft, they're investing in closed source models. And if we actually sort of have this capability able to live on our phones or our computers or devices, it's still kind of an open question. What model gets the most attention? What lives on in the greatest capacity? So I think with the NVIDIA announcement today and what we think Apple could do in AI, which is more edge computing on device AI, the open source models like Meta's Llama and Mistral could be interesting to watch.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to mention that you just said that Google did not do an advertisement as it relates to Gemini. They did do an advertising for hardware. They did do, I think it was a Pixel phone, and showing how they're using AI on the device. And I think that's a big story that you're going to be spending, I think this, a lot of time on, especially as we get closer to June and Apple's Worldwide Developers Forum, because that's one area that they can probably really lean into as they think about what sort of hardware they're going to be coming out, and Vision Pro with spatial computing and all the integrations that they could have there across services.
Yeah. Although Pixel phones, right? It's interesting. They keep pushing their hardware in the Pixel phone, but they just have such small market cap. Android, though, that was the interesting thing about the Gemini announcement, putting it all under one umbrella. They do have the capability to roll it out to half the smartphones in the world through the Android operating system. But again, does Google have to do something bold here? Maybe we'll see that at IL later this year.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk quickly. You got your hands on a Vision Pro last week. You did a bit of a review here. A bunch of my tech nerdy friends, without naming any names, they all bought them. They're kind of early adopters, and generally they're very optimistic about it. A friend of mine, Cleo Abram, who is a phenomenal tech journalist from Huge If True, who's also been on the pod, she did a great review of it with Marquise Brownlee. You know him. He was actually in your long form piece that you did last week on it. And she made a really great point. She basically said, this is version 1 and it's excellent. Of course, there are some drawbacks to it, but she's like, this is as bad as it gets from here on out. And I thought that was really kind of an interesting way to think about it. And then from my friends, I've heard so much. There's gamers, there's people who just like to kind of chill out and use maybe a Headspace app. There's those who like to be very introverted and watch a movie on their own. I've heard a lot of examples. Ben Thompson in Stratechery this morning was talking about how he used it on a coach plane one flight and it just changed his experience altogether. You know what I mean? So like the use cases right now, they're just scratching the surface. It's not something for maybe me or you, because I can't think of too many pieces of anything that I go out and spend $3,500 on a lark. But right now, I think the early reviews are like, this is going to be amazing, but it's not for everyone at the moment. I'm just curious, what were some of your takeaways from a tech standpoint? Because another one of my friends who's a tech founder, and he said this is going to be a $50 billion business for them in the not so distant future.
I would agree with everything that you just said. I would add one more word: future. It is the future, and that is so instantly clear from when you put it on within 5 minutes of having that headset on. And I read the reviews and I saw the videos of, the demos and stuff. And I actually brought my 8-year-old with me to try it out. And he was looking on the screen. He was kind of bored. The screen was showing what I was seeing. And my jaw just kind of dropped. Like, it is so like almost magical. Like, it reminded me of the first time. And I remember exactly where I was when I had my first iPhone. It was in China. And I remember I opened up the box and I was looking at it, and the intuition of Apple products makes it a step above anything that you've seen before. Even though you've seen something similar, like a different headset or the Oculus, the Vision Pro, just, you could tell I don't know what I would use it for. I'm like you, but I want to buy it. I'm going to resist, because I know that this is the first generation. And, my husband makes fun of me when I try to be an early adopter. I had the first Apple Watch, and it didn't actually, I haven't worn one since, but the Vision Pro is just this incredible piece of technology. And I have no doubt that the killer app is coming, and we're all going to want one. And we're all going to, if you can afford it, you're going to find a way to buy it. And then when the price comes down, as it inevitably will, who knows how long that's going to be, it can be a mainstream product. It's incredible. That's all I have to say. But I can't describe it, because you actually have to put it on to understand. And when my 8-year-old put it on too, by the way, he was equally blown away in a way that you can't understand it when you're just looking at a screenshot of someone else testing it out.
It's funny, there's been a lot of discussion that it's the iPad killer, right? When you think about an iPad, one of the biggest criticisms that it really isn't for producing content, it's for like taking in content, right? And so what I've seen in some of these reviews, like, this is the sort of device where you can just create, you can do multiple things at once. You can get a keyboard for it, and you can actually just type on the keyboard and you can see the stuff coming up in a way. So it's kind of interesting in a way that over the last, call it 15 years or so, we've gotten really used to this big hunk of metal and glass that we've been banging on and not being particularly productive with. But all of a sudden, you have this other device that, is really changing the game. It's kind of sci-fi Minority Report sort of stuff. I just think that a lot of those videos I've seen online of these kind of nerds walking around doing stuff with their hands in the air and everything like that outside, I think there's going to be a little bit of a stigma with that for a while. And then the last piece of the puzzle is like, it's going to have to get much smaller, right? Like, this is not something that people are going to be using.
It was very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Even 20 minutes on, it was uncomfortable, and you could really feel it on. But the thing that's interesting about the Vision Pro is that it's a very personal device. Even though you can see through it and you can interact with your outside surroundings, it's not like the Oculus, which is meant to be social, more of a gaming device. This is meant to immerse you. And I was thinking about that. I was talking about it with my 8-year-old, and it's like, can you imagine watching a movie and you all have your own headset on? It's not a social thing. And that future does scare me a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think probably the first like mass adoption will be in the enterprise. I know a lot of folks who are developing a lot of services, whether it's training modules. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, but that's still a very expensive device, and one that's going to be iterated upon over the next 5 years in sort of a big way. So it'll be interesting to see if we see businesses, kind of use this for productivity purposes and cut down travel expense. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, we all remember what Mark Zuckerberg's vision for the metaverse was in late 2021 when he renamed the company and did the big thing. It's kind of interesting, though, that it sounds like Apple has leapfrogged them on the hardware and the software front, but obviously also on the price point too. So there's going to be a convergence there, I suspect.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think after testing it out, it's apples to lose now, and the price hopefully will only come down. It's a pretty amazing product.
All right, Debo, we covered a lot of ground. I know that you're going to be very busy. A bunch of gig economy companies are reporting this week. I'm sure I'll be seeing you on CNBC's Fast Money over the course of the week. I really appreciate you being here, breaking all of the Super Bowl ad and related consumer insights down. Also, stick around for my conversation. It's Funders and Founders with Rick Heitzman and Zach Rotano.